Well, good morning, everybody. How's it going out there? I don't have an attendance count on my screen at the time. So, okay, got a few hellos. Say hi in chat. Let me know you're out there. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. For reference, I'm John Peck. I'm Senior Manager of Developer Relations team here in the Americas for GitHub. And I am looking forward to speaking with you all today about how you can get started with GitHub for Startups. And I'm going to take you through kind of end to end everything we do. Hi, George. Hi, Devesh. Hi, Kathleen. Hi, Michael. Awesome. All right. We got a few people out there. Let's get rolling. Let me start with this. I always like to prove to people that I've been there. So I woke up this morning. I dropped on my startup gear. This is from Algorithmia. That is a binary tree. It doesn't show up great on camera. Machine learning hosting startup that I was part of 4 years ago and earlier. Sold off to Data Robot. This is Gift Starter. You've probably never heard of us, but give us a shout if you have. Does it show up? Let's gift together. Shared gift sharing. That one, unfortunately, died the market death about 8 years ago. For the last almost 4, I've been here with GitHub, and I'm having a great time, not just because I love what I do, but I love what we make. So let me see if I can get some screen sharing going here, and we can start talking. All righty. Good stuff. Hopefully this is showing up well on your screen. I'm going to get my browser out of the window here. We will come back to that in just 1 second. So I'm actually just going to let it sit down here for easy access. We're going to do some live demos in the middle of all of this. Hopefully you all know who GitHub is by now. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here. But we're a complete DevOps platform, end to end. You know, what we do is we really make sure to get every parts of the DevOps platform there for you. I'll talk a little bit about what those are, but you're not joining up here just for, hey, I need someplace to put my code. Really, our objective is to help you build, scale, deliver, plan, automate all the things, everything you need in your ecosystem to be successful at developing whatever product you are creating. Right. And so, I'm going to go through a little bit of like, okay, what's DevOps? What's the state of it today? Pretty brief. Don't worry, I won't get super historic on you. Hey, we've got AI in our platform now. Gonna bring some of that in. Most of that's going to be near the end. So those of you that are waiting for some Copilot goodness, if you're aware of that, stick around. That's going to be at the bottom of the hour, top of the hour. I forget which is which. Closer to 10. And I'm going to, of course, cover all of our platform and what we can bring to you, right? So what do we know now? First of all, huge amount of time wasted in how people collaborate. And that's just a matter of like everything from, I need to physically walk over or go into an office to talk to somebody to actually work on something in a real way, to I'm working between multiple different communication systems. And so I can't easily just tell people exactly what I need at exactly the right time and have it shared to them and visible and usable, all the way down to I'm using a separate CI from my actual code storage. And in switching between those two systems, I'm losing time, mental effort, going from one framework to another, right? So we're going to talk about that and how you can make it better. We're going to talk about security, right? Right now, what we know is that flaws in applications, the actual code, the actual way the application works, like other stuff, edge security, all of that matters, right? But flaws in the applications themselves are still the primary attack vector for people. So, it's really important that you have your code secure, but there's an average in large industry of one security team member for every 100 developers. That's just not enough people to keep up if they're doing it manually. And I'm sure that many of you out there in the startup world do not have a dedicated security person, nor do you want to spend that head count on that. So we're going to try and solve that for you as well. And then, of course, there's AI, right? How do you work that into your actual software development in a way that is safe, that works for your entire team, that's there at the tip of your fingers, and that is then going to be part of the entire development process. So right now, only 10% of companies have really figured out how to actually use AI in some way in their organizations. For most, it's not complete and end-to-end. Let's delve into how that can be part of the platform itself and how it can help you along. All right, so let's skip over this. You want to hear more about the platform. What have we got? What am I going to tell you about today? Obviously, there's AI in everything we do, but I'm going to focus most of that on the development side for today. Keep eyes on GitHub, and later on, maybe toward Universe, we'll have some more announcements about DevOps elsewhere, about AI elsewhere in the platform. Just a hint. We're going to talk about the collaboration portion of things, how your developers actually work together, how they can toss code back and forth, yes, but how can they collaborate on a real development basis, right? Not just sharing files. How does that play into your productivity? How can you be the most efficient development team possible? And by the way, I will say happiness plays into that as well, because I don't know about you, I'm happy when I'm productive, when I'm in flow state, and I like to stay there. So those two kind of go hand in hand. And we'll talk about that security aspect. And of course, throughout all of this, how we help you scale, but also how we can make the machines do things for you, your DevOps system scale without necessarily having to wrap up headcount as fast as you might have to otherwise. All right, let's start out with collaboration. I'm just going to check in here. I tend to just kind of go 90 miles an hour once I'm in the flow. I will check back in that chat room. If you've got any questions at any point, just type them out. Know that I'm going to flip over every couple of minutes to try and see what's going on. And if you have any questions. Starting out with collaboration, right? What do we know about using GitHub, right? And, GitHub has, I should say, obviously, okay, maybe not obviously. We serve 10%, I believe at this point. No, 50% of the Fortune 100. We serve hundreds of millions of developers out there. Of course, we have hundreds of millions of repos, both public and private. So we've got some experience, right? We're the number one DevOps platform in the world, satisfying both individual developers and startups and mid-tier and large enterprise, right? Across the board. From that, we get a huge amount of data, right? We can see things like, okay, there's an 80% improvement in how much developer onboarding training you have to do when you start using GitHub. That has implications on savings for your company, right? We see inner sourcing becoming a thing across the companies that we work with, and that really improves their collaboration capabilities. Let me define that for you. If inner sourcing hasn't come up as a term in your company, most of us are familiar with open sourcing. Open sourcing is this sort of standard that, okay, you put code out there, you make it publicly visible, other people are going to come along and they're going to help you out, right? By exposing the code to as many developers as possible, other folks can come in, improve on it, debug it, submit pull requests directly to you. So they're improving the product instead of making a copy and working on it in some black hole somewhere. They can converse with you about what the best things are to do at any given point in time. And you're no longer that one developer in a room trying to create something and figure out what might be best and getting stuck on little technical problems that you may not have ramped up on yet. Instead, you're working with a whole large community. Organizations work more efficiently when they adopt the same set of practices within their own walls. So obviously, you don't want to open source all of your company code. You might. There's a few companies out there that are able to do that. But for most companies we talk to, they do need to keep most of their code within their own walls. But the big thing there is making sure that as you create code, and this applies to documentation, it applies to automation, it applies to all other parts of your DevOps process, the more people inside your company you can give access to that, the stronger a project you're going to have. It's too easy as a developer to feel like we have to create something that's perfect and not let anyone see it. In reality, when we do that and we keep people out, we end up with a weaker product, and you try to launch it and it just fails, either publicly or within your own company, because something else has to take its place if it doesn't work well. The sooner you get other people involved in your project, the stronger it's going to be. And you're also going to make relationships there that will pay off later. Not just social ones, but also ones where you get to understand other developers across your company's strengths and weaknesses and preferences on a technical level. So you're going to find yourself collaborating with people that aren't even necessarily within your management triangle, but hey, they can come in, they can spend 5 minutes because they're an expert doing XYZ and unblock you. Later on, you're going to do the same for them, which is way better than the two of you having to step away from your core project for 3 days to learn a new technology. And as you start having that kinds of interactions inside your company, we find that this can more than double the development rate inside any given company. So okay, probably enough on that, but I'm huge on inner sourcing, as you can probably tell, and making sure that collaboration can occur effectively. Where does collaboration start, right? Collaboration starts with, hey, there's something we need to do, right? For most of us, we're not a one-person show. We're not, launching something that's entirely in our heads, even if we are, and I've done this many times myself, right? You start up a project to put down all of your thoughts and understand what your pipeline is going to be as you create this product. And so we wanted to make sure that that was built right into your DevOps system. You're not going to have to walk outside and use some other piece of software. You can if you want. There's nothing blocking you. We'll still connect to other project management tooling if you've got something already on board. But there's a freedom to being inside your DevOps platform. You're working on your code. You have an issue right there that's related to what you're doing. And when, for example, you commit, you see changes on that issue, everything's tracked. You can easily pull in other people. You can link multiple issues to a pull request, so that when any set of code changes goes in, it can be marked automatically which issues this satisfies. You can even have them move state, etc. And so all of this is hugely important. I want to give you, and I'll start in on some of the kind of basic demo stuff. I'm not going to go super deep here, right? Because my objective is not to, I can't in an hour, train you to do everything inside the system, right? But what I can do is I can at least show off some of the basics of what we have available right now in order for you to be able to use these. So if you touched on GitHub, say, I don't know, a year and a half to 2 years ago, your understanding of what we can do in terms of issues inside projects was just this. It was just, okay, a project has a set of issues. You can create them, you can tag them, you can drop into any particular one, you can comment it, you can tag individuals, etc. They get notified automatically. And that's all really good. But what was lacking was a cohesive way of visualizing all of the issues other than just here's a list, right? You had some Kanban boards on an individual project by project basis, but those were stuck to the one individual project. And the thing we realized is that we wanted to be able to have people create multiple different code repositories, have issues relating to each of those individual code repositories, but we want to create big views, which would be, hey, this product we're creating depends on A, B, C, and D different repos, and they relate in some way. We even wanted to be able to create projects that might not be linked to a particular code repository, right? And so this is where this idea of what we initially called Projects V2, now we just call it projects, new GitHub projects, where you have multiple issues on a big board. They come from different projects. You can set up different views and different filters on them. Each of these different tabs is working across the same set of issues from multiple projects or just individual entries that exist standalone on here. But there are different ways of looking at this data. So I might be looking for a particular label. I might be looking for something that is assigned to me. I don't think I have anything on this particular project right now. but I could put a tag in there. I can visualize them as a Kanban board. I can visualize them as a table. I can modify the columns. I can create custom columns, new pick lists, etc. I can do time prediction on these and lay it all out. And these are all dynamic, drag and drop, all of that good stuff. So I can actually grab one of these. I don't have edit access on this one. Move things around, put it into other columns, all of the stuff you'd expect from a Kanban board. So basically what you've got there is you've got a complete project management system with the things you'd expect: Kanban boards, tabular views, tagging, custom data types, timelines, the ability to even customize your own workflows and how things should be placed when they're ingested, all of that. And it's attached to your GitHub repos. So you can drop into any one of these. You can go and you can look at the issue itself if you want. You're dropped right into the repo where it actually exists. And now I can bounce around inside this. I can do the usual stuff with the code, etc. Right? So it's all tied together. There's no leaving and going to some other tooling at any given point. Let's talk a little bit about the repos themselves, right? And then why those exist the way they do. What you'll notice here inside the repos is that first off, there's, tabs for everything up here going beyond just the code itself. Because what's a repo? Yeah, it stores code, of course. It also stores other files, it stores documentation, etc. But functionally, a GitHub repository is the core for the entire project, right? It links to the project board and the issues that it might be attached to. It has the code and documentation. It has certain special things, like, of course, if you create a README, that's going to show up as essentially the home page, if you will, of the repo. One point there, as you start a new repository, in order to improve the experience of your collaborators, always make sure you have a really good README in there describing what the project is, why it exists, who the lead developers are on it, and what other things it relates to, and just link them out here so people know how things tie together. Of course, you also want some documentation as to, if this is a code project, how you set it up, how you actually install it, etc. All of that should be right inside your README as well. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about Codespaces, which helps you not have to do all those manual steps, but you still want a description here of like how you can actually get started with this, right? So you've got all that. That's all great. By the way, in issues, in all of it, it supports rich tagging. It supports full markdown, etc. The rich tagging bit, though, I really want to hone in on. If I've got an issue that I create and I @mention somebody's username, they're going to get a notification in whatever manner they have set up the notifications to preferentially occur. For most people, that's going to be email. Although we do have other mechanisms. I'll talk about those in a second too. I can @mention somebody inside a markdown file, and that's going to link to their profile and all of that kind of stuff. And I can do things like in issues, I can mention another issue by hashtag. It's going to rich embed the title of it, linkable to that, etc. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, but everything ties together inside all of our comments, markdown, etc., where you can use this not just, again, as code storage, but it's also a free-flowing way of getting around to different issues, seeing their state in real time, different people notifying folks, etc. Right? The other thing is that in the repo itself, you've got the code itself, of course, you can pull that down. You've got that link to the issues, but you've got everything else. You've got pull requests, for example. And do I have a slide on pull requests? I don't, so I'll just talk through it. A pull request is a wrap up of a batch of changes, right? So I go ahead, I change a bunch of code, hopefully on a branch, and then I submit that set of changes as something I want somebody else to review. That's called a pull request, right? And I will mention, by the way, again, this mindset of inner source, of creating collaboration across your company. You want anybody who has permission to see this code, who's a trusted member of your company, you want them to be able to potentially make changes. But you don't want them to be able to force those changes in without any sort of review. Now, I don't think I have permission to change the settings on this one, so I'll show you on a different repository. We have what is called branch protection rules, and we've implemented those as rule sets. So what you can do is you can say, hey, I want a target branch on main, and I'm going to say something along the lines of block force pushes require a pull request before merging. And I can even set up the required number of approvers. So what this does is it basically makes it so that if somebody comes along and they want to change the code in my repository by whatever means, whether it's inside the web editor, whether it's by pulling it down and modifying it locally, which is how most of us are going to work, when they go to commit, they're not going to be allowed to commit to the main branch directly. That checkbox makes it so that they are going to have to create a branch containing their changes and then submit a pull request before we can actually move forward. That pull request then will surface itself here. And I've got a bunch here that actually come from our security tooling, which also automatically submits pull requests. So you won't see any real names on this, but ignore that for the minute. And what that pull request does is it contains a bunch of commits. In this case, there's just one change. You can see the changes that occur inside the code right there. It tells you what checks have been executed on it. I'll talk about automation in our next step and how that works in here. I can walk through the list of files. I can see the delta between them. Obviously, for stuff like package lock, it's not automatically going to show me, but I can load it, even though that's going to be large. And then I have the option to review these changes and either approve them and let them go through. If I've satisfied the number of minimum approvers by doing that, my pull request will move along and make itself ready to merge, or even auto merge if I've set it up to do that. But I can also go in and I can say, hey, this isn't good enough yet. There's something wrong with it. I want to request changes, describe it out here, and submit that note right inside this view. The developer who submitted that pull request is going to get a notification. They're going to see what I'm talking about, and then they're going to come back in and they are going to go ahead and fix it. I won't demonstrate it here, I can even put in requests on particular line level changes in code to give them context. So I can say right here, this section of code needs to change. Do you think this is a good idea? What happens is then the sequence of something needs to change in the code stops being, hey, I made a bunch of changes, I put them in. 2 weeks later at the end of my sprint, we're going to have a big meeting where a bunch of people get together and they all talk about those changes, and we spend like 3, 4, 5 hours reviewing everybody's changes, sitting in a room, and hopefully things go through. And that's a terrible experience, and we know it slows everybody down and it's painful, right? Instead, the experience of making changes to a repo becomes continuous, where I do the work I need to do, I create a pull request, I name other people to come look at it, or they get automatically named by virtue of the settings in the repository and their relationship to me inside the organization. People come in, they look at that code, they maybe make changes, suggest changes. You can also do that. You can suggest exact code I should drop in here and say, maybe you want to use this version instead, and you could one-click accept it. Or we can have a discussion about the set of changes there. And then when we're all in agreement that it's ready to go, we all put our approvals in and the thing moves on forward. And that is such a better experience because it means that I, as a developer, I can stay in flow on the things I want to work on. I put together a bunch of changes, I submit that pull request, and I move on to my next task. Sometime later, maybe tomorrow, maybe later in the day, depending on my timing, I just check in on that PR and I see, how's it going? Have people looked at it? Or I get auto notified that everybody's approved this. And then when it's ready, either it'll automatically update if I've set it to, or I can put in manual blocks. I could even manual override if I'm an admin to go ahead and put those changes in, and it flows forward. And what this means is that everything inside your repository has been reviewed by other people, has been tested. I'll talk about that automation in just a second, has passed, is good to go, and it all occurs in the background for me. I don't have to think about it or waste manual blocking time to get that work done. I code, I send, I go to something else, I code, I send, If I'm someone whose primary job is to review other people's work, I'm getting, notifications throughout the day. When I choose to go into my email and take a look at them, I'll work through the approvals I have to put in. And by the way, if I happen to be on the go, I can even do that with mobile. So I don't have to be physically sitting in front of my computer if I'm in a position in a company where I'm spending time largely in meetings, largely jumping to other people's desks, helping them out, pair programming, or largely thinking about vision and what we're going to do next with the product. I don't want to have to, go back, sit at my desk for an hour and work through all of these. I want to be able to unblock people immediately throughout the day. So I can get out of a meeting. I can open my phone. There's going to be maybe 2 or 3 notifications on it from the GitHub for Mobile app. I can click right through in there. I can see the code changes. I can do exactly the same things I just showed you on desktop, except I'm doing it in the palm of my hand in that couple of minutes before I go on to my next meeting, right? Now, to some people, that sounds terrible. I've certainly gotten that reaction, in which case, just don't use it. Go and use the desktop experience. But other people really love this because it means they don't now have to carve out a separate hour in their day to go sit down and review everything. And it means people are unblocked faster. So I don't get to that point where 3 in the afternoon, I'm finally done with my meetings, but my developers have been waiting for my approval on stuff to keep on moving. Instead, they get it as fast as possible. I go in with my day, they go on with theirs. Okay, so let's move on from core repositories and inner sourcing, and let's move on to some of the productivity features in the platform, right? We're going to talk about automation. We're going to talk about Codespaces, if you've heard of it. If not, you're in for a good treat. What do these bring us, right? What do we think about as we're focusing on productivity tools as GitHub, right? We're thinking about how you can deploy faster, how you can have the option of a ready-made solution for anything you need to do right in the platform. Again, we're not blocking you from using anything else. If you've got preferred tools, keep on using them, and in many cases we'll integrate. But we want to make it so there is a default option so that you don't have to go find another piece of software if you don't already have one to do a particular thing. For example, how you work with your IDE, how you deal with pulling down and setting up your projects. See that in a second. And of course, what's the ultimate goal of these, right? We prioritize reuse over creating new redundant code. We saw that with the whole inner sourcing motif. We want to reduce the number of tasks you actually have to do by automating all of the things that can be automated, and just overall make you more efficient, right? So first thing I want to talk about in that vein is GitHub Actions. Now, going back to our view here, you will have seen at the top that there is a folder for actions in here. And what actions are is they are complete available automation right inside your repository. And again, folks, any questions, go ahead, hit me with them in chat. I know I'm going a million miles an hour here, but I want to hear it. If you've touched on any of these, if you've had problems with any of these, or if you just aren't aware of this yet, send me a message. I'll check in on those. So what Actions does is it brings complete automation right into the repository itself so that you don't have to step away to another tool, and so that all of the management and control of like who can automate what, etc., that is all something that you can manage inside your DevOps system itself. So you don't have to have redundant user identities. You don't have to do things like send an email to the only person who has access to your CI/CD saying, hey, I just added this stuff. Can you please fix it? Instead, automation becomes a sort of in-flow process. And let me give you a concrete example of this, which I think is an experience a lot of us have had, which is that, maybe I'm going along well and I've got a good test suite for my project. I know just having a good test suite is itself a painful thing, but let's say we've gotten there, right? And let's say we have our CI/CD set up properly so that, yeah, when I make that bunch of changes, when I submit that pull request, it's going to test everything and it's going to make sure that everything passes and it's good to go. And then it's going to actually send it out to production, right? For many of us, all of that occurs off of our core DevOps platform. So our experience is we code, we submit the changes, we work with others to resolve any conflicts and to make sure we're all happy with the code release. But then it goes over to the CI/CD, and then we're getting maybe emails. Maybe we have to go look at another system. Maybe we have to get notified by an admin if something breaks. And quite often the experience is that I wrote my new code features, and I wrote my tests. Okay, great. But hey, there's some environment variables that need to be dropped in to the CI/CD environment. Otherwise, my new features aren't going to work right. I wrote the test and the test ran properly locally, but because there's some slight configuration change in my CI/CD in terms of how it's actually being executed, it doesn't work in the CI/CD. And I've got to go back and forth between those two systems and figure out why, right? We want that all to be a single integrated process. So here's what you are able to do. GitHub Actions exists right inside your code repository. Yes, as a tab, but also as a set of files inside this .github workflows folder. So ultimately, every piece of automation you write for your project is a piece of code, right? Code as configuration makes everything better because it's easy to manage. You can see the changes to the automation itself right next to your code changes. So you can diff them, you can see the history, you can see when I added a test, I also at the same time added this piece in the automation to fire that test properly, all that kind of good stuff. It makes postmortems really easy because I can say, okay, I've got an existing version that works. I have another version later that doesn't work. Give me the diff, and I can see the code changes right next to the environment changes, right next to the automation changes, all in a single view. So I can be like, oh, it's very clear. I added this feature here, but I didn't add the environment variable to support it right inside that diff, right? So it makes that all really easy. And it also makes it easy to share and for other people to understand and work with. Because what I don't want is I don't want a piece of automation that runs either on my own machine and only exists there, or only inside separate CI/CD system where other people can't see the automation itself. What you want is something exposed and available to everybody so they can see what's actually happening inside the system. So if they need to make changes with the correct permissions, of course, they can suggest those changes so that if they want to make a variant of their own for some other project, they can just copy that configuration, move it into theirs, and adjust it as necessary, right? So code as config is wonderful, right? Comment if you disagree. And what we did is we wanted to have both code as config, and we wanted to have, a visual UI on top of this, but have it all contained inside the repo. So you can have as many different configurations as many different pieces of automation. We call them workflows inside that workflows folder. They can have different triggers. So, you can say, when should this occur? It can occur obviously on code changes, whether that's a change to a file, a push, whether it's a pull request being approved. But they can also trigger on other stuff. They can trigger on cron. They can trigger on webhooks. They can trigger on other actions being completed. So you can chain things. They can trigger on a change to an issue state. So I move an issue to done, and that fires off the thing that's going to check and push out my code. So you've got all kinds of different variety of triggers. You've got built-in runners, which are automatic cloud-scaled runners that we provide for, Linux, for Mac OS, for Windows, most recent version, as well as historic versions, so you can pin it to the one you want. You have built-in secrets. So you don't want to put your secrets, obviously, inside your automation code itself. Those are configured in your repository. For humans, they are write once, and then you can never read it again, of course, unless you save it somewhere in your password manager. For the automation, it can automatically pull those named secrets and embed them into the workflow. They're automatically redacted from logs and all of that kind of stuff for security purposes, right? And then you can have, whatever jobs you want. And these jobs are, a combination usually of scripts you're writing yourself and pieces of automation you pull from elsewhere, right? Where is elsewhere? If you go and you search for GitHub Actions Marketplace, you will find out there. What are we up to today? 19,802 results. This was 19,760 last night when I checked it, if I can recall correctly. So this is both the largest ecosystem of open source automation components, but also the fastest growing ecosystem. We add somewhere between 300 and 500 actions every single month into this ecosystem. What do they do for you? Well, whatever it is I'm trying to work with, maybe I'm working with AWS. And I want to deploy to Fargate, right? Okay. What you're going to see is you're going to see inside this marketplace. And marketplace is kind of a weird term because these are all free. Like you don't have to pay to get that source code through open source, right? But it's marketplace in the sense that lots of people can contribute and anybody can consume. So who contributes? You've got first parties. You've got AWS itself actually contributing, the EKS on Fargate action, for example. You can see that nice little verified check mark because there's somebody we know and trust. You're also going to get people, individual developers and separate development groups contributing stuff as well. And those don't always have the check mark. That's one of the ways you can visually see the difference. But what is common between all of those is that I can punch into any of these. I can see how I would use this action. And without going into technical detail, most of these are more or less, copy and paste. If I want to deploy to AWS Fargate, I'm just going to literally copy this step and I'm going to paste it into my code in the deploy phase of that workflow. I'm going to configure a couple of secrets, as mentioned, inside my repository. But otherwise, what this is going to do is it's going to, pick up my container, send it out to Fargate, get it hosted, using the IAM that I've defined, right? So I can see basic stuff like that, but I can also see, how many other people are using this. How many contributors are there? Usually this is, a half dozen to a dozen or more. In this particular case, AWS uses a single consolidated account for deploying it. So you see, the one. But you can also then drop down into the repository itself that it comes from. This is magical because it's bringing that open source mindset into automation, right? With a lot of CI/CD systems, there's components you can bring in. They're largely made by, the first party provider or even the CI/CD system itself. And they're largely immutable and they're largely things that you can't see all of the source code to, and you don't have a lot of ability to access the development team that made it and request changes and that sort of thing. Varies by provider, but I will say personally, my experience with that has been bad. GitHub Actions changes this game entirely because every single action out there, every single automation component, I can drill down to the open source repo. I can, again, see who's contributing to it. I can drop an issue onto that project if I have a problem with it. I can even fork it, modify the code in some way that I think fixes a bug or increases the functionality, and then I can submit a pull request to that team because it's an open source repo, right? That team can then see the pull request, make any minor changes to make it functional the way they want it to be, and then merge that into their project. What does that mean for you as a software development team, right? It means that you are no longer going out, finding components, wondering whether they're going to die, wondering whether they're well supported, finding a bug, saying, you know what, we either can't fix this bug, or in many cases, we're going to, if we have access to the source code, make our own internal copy, modify it to work. And then forevermore, we're stuck with these two different versions, the public known version and the one that we're internally supporting. Over time, that builds up. And you have a lot of your engineering time spent supporting these variations of the automation components that you've created, or just writing your own and having to support those, right? The experience with GitHub Actions is that you write your core workflow, what steps are going to occur where. You drop in your own scripts where you need to. There's certain things you're going to do that are custom. But then when you're doing those standard things, attaching a test harness and running it, building out a container, going and deploying something to a particular service provider, etc. I'm just going out to the Actions marketplace. I'm finding the component I need. I'm dropping those in, and I'm very quickly assembling a complete workflow that does all the things I need. but relies on this open source community. That code's not going away. And if there is a problem with it, I just let somebody know. And most of the time they're going to come along and they're going to fix it. And I'm just going to update to the new version. So this is a beautiful experience, I promise you. Now, what about actually seeing and executing those actions, right? I told you they can be triggered by all kinds of different stuff. And of course, we want to be able to see that they actually do run. Let's see if Bookstore has any past executions. No. Okay, I'll just go with this one. So I can see in here, most of these, you know, they're updates and linters and that sort of thing. Do I have a complex one? CodeQL is kind of fun. Let's see what the linter update looks like. I think most of these are going to be one step, so the visualizations aren't actually going to be very interesting. But if I had multiple jobs in here, they'd be visually chained. I would see the interaction between them. I would see branch points, etc. If I'm running on multiple workers at the same time, etc. I can drop into any one of these and see what actually occurred inside of it. This one's too old, but were it a more recent execution, what I would see here is, yes, there we go, a complete log of everything that happened. I've got stuff that's coming both from my components I've dropped in, as well as my own scripts echoing data back. So I can go down here and I can really drill down to exactly what's occurring at every step in this process. I can also do things like rerun all of the jobs. If for some reason it failed because of an external state problem, I can just say, go ahead and re-execute it. We even have the option to up the debug level when we rerun. So what does that do for me, right? A lot of the time when I have some piece of automation execute and it fails, I have to go stand up a mock environment for that or delve deep into the CI/CD system to figure out exactly what the problems were. And that, again, is thrashing between different systems. It makes my life hard. By being able to execute with debug when I rerun a job right inside the built-in automation system, I get deeper logging. I'm able to see things that I wouldn't, except maybe by going back to an IDE. And now, in many cases, I can understand what the problem is and fix it immediately without even having to step into my IDE. I can just look through the now new debug log, find environment variables missing, whatever it is, go ahead, add those in, and re-execute. I'm good to go, right? So super smooth. All right, so speaking of IDEs, I promised you I would get to this other thing that's super cool. You know what? Let me step back because I did forget to mention one thing. I told you how you can add automation. Obviously, we're going to do that for all the standard stuff. We're going to do that for integrating our standard CI/CD workflow, getting our deployments going, etc. But on the integration end, I did want to mention one thing. You'll see down here, there's this some checks haven't completed yet when I'm looking at a pull request. So again, I've submitted a bunch of code. I've wrapped it up into a pull request. I've said, hey, I want people to approve this. I've got humans approving that and saying, yes, it should go through, or it shouldn't. You should make these changes. But you know what? I want all of my automation to check in on it at the same time. So for those things that are set to trigger when I make a code change, and I can configure inside a repo or inside an org, hey, these things always have to run on every PR. Right. So I can say you're basically not allowed to move forward with a set of code changes unless like this security scan is run, this testing suite, whatever it is I need. Right. Those surface themselves right inside the pull request. So again, this is our hub for collaboration on a set of changes. I've got people reacting and saying this code's good to go in a single pane of glass. I've also got my automation reacting and saying, hey, these checks didn't run or these checks failed, etc. I can go ahead and I can look at the details of any of those right inside there. Again, this X run is too old and I've got my caches falling out, but I can see what the results of it were and why it did or didn't pass. And I can set up blocks. So I can say things like, okay, this particular automation, this particular set of tests, this is optional. You can still push the pull request through. It's just informational. I can say on other ones, hard block, if this set of tests doesn't pass, you are not allowed to submit this pull request and move it forward. I'm an admin here, so I have override capability. You can assign that as you want. But for general developers who don't have the admin privilege, what they'll see at that point is they've got to go back and resolve that before it can move forward. Why is that so powerful? Because now you're not worried about things leaking into your production systems. without having gone through all of the required test procedures, right? And they're visible in the same pane of glass that you're going to do all of your normal work anyway. So it's not thrashing for you. You're just, again, submitted my code, created a pull request. I get back notifications, other people approve it. I click through that one PR. I can see all their reactions to it. I can also see what the automation has done in reaction to that. And I have a single place where I can continue to move forward that and get it out into the world. Okay, so we talked a lot about automation. I also want to make sure that we get to Codespaces. And just to give you a quick roadmap of the next 15 minutes, I'm going to spend 2 or 3 minutes on Codespaces. I'm going to spend 5 or 6 minutes on security, and I'm going to spend 5 or 6 minutes on Copilot. And that'll be the end of our session. So Codespaces makes it possible for you to work from anywhere on any device. What do I mean by that? For most of us, when we go to start working on our code, what we're doing is we're pulling this down locally, right? We're going to clone the code down to our machine. We're going to open up our local IDE, whatever our favorite is, and we're going to start working on that code. But it's never that simple, right? It's never just pull down the code and start working, right? If you've worked on a significant project, you know that that takes minutes. And then industry averages here, it takes between 2 hours and 2 days on average to go from I've got the code to I've done all the things I need to do to really start developing. What do I mean by that? I mean, setting up your environment variables. I mean, separating your Python 2.7 virtual environment from your Python 3.8 virtual environment, making sure they don't collide. Walking through all those manual steps of configuring the background processes, the test engines, everything that needs to be local, the local server instance, so that I can properly code and see the results and iterate on what I'm doing, right? So that's a huge blocker. Plus it means I'm locked to individual machines, right? I set up my laptop to work with this project and I've done all that work. And now if later in the day, next week, over the weekend, an emergency occurs, if I don't have that physical machine with me, I can't actually work because the setup time is too long. We wanted to eliminate these problems, right? So we created this thing called Codespaces. With Codespaces, you can be in the repo itself, and you can say, instead of running locally, I'm going to run with a Codespace. I can create a new one. I happen to have one here that's hibernated, so I'm going to restore that. You can think of Codespaces like remote machines in the sense that I can stop and start Codespaces, and it's very much akin to closing my laptop, right? I can be doing work in here, and I can stop the code space and I can come back 2 weeks later and my cursor is right where it was, working on the same thing it was. Now, for most projects, this spins up in less than 15 seconds, even for a fresh one, if it's configured properly. We support something called pre-builds, where you can set it up so there's always a code space ready to go with the latest changes inside it. What do I get with a code space? The default experience is VS Code inside the web browser. This is fully featured VS Code IDE. It just happens to be running inside the web browser container. But that's not the only experience. If you're using local VS Code, if you're using local Visual Studio, if you're using JetBrains, if you're using Vim, you can still take advantage of Codespaces. The exact experience on each one is a little bit different, but ultimately what you get is you get your IDE, and your IDE, as it makes changes, is making changes on a remotely executing container, which has the whole project set up in it. Now, what do I mean by set up? I mean, when I hit that button, it didn't just do the code. It did all of the things necessary to set up this project. I talked about code as config earlier and why it's so amazing, right? There's this dev container folder, and it contains Dockerfile and the dev container JSON, which are all the things about this project that need to happen to get a running IDE, right, and development environment. So, that's everything from, hey, what terminal settings do we want, to what extensions are in the browser, to, what ports are going to be open and available for me to local loopback test on, all of that stuff. And this merges in with your own personal preferences. So if I have a particular color scheme or that sort of thing that I want, I can configure that as well. That'll be for me, and it'll merge in with the project dev container to actually stand up my code space properly. When I'm actually in there, what I have is this full-featured IDE, which I have lost the tab to. There we go. I can do all the things I would normally do in here. I can edit this code. I can commit in changes. I've actually got some in here I'm going to discard so I can show you something else later, etc. I go ahead, I code. I can start up my test server, or I can start it up in debug mode. It's going to open up a separate tab if I'm working on a web application and show me that web view of the test server running inside the container, so I can iterate, go back and forth, see my changes in the application itself. That's secured, of course. And all of the things I would normally do. And then when I'm done, I just close the code space. I just say, okay, all done, stop the code space, and I walk away. By the way, it even supports all the normal VS Code plugins if you're using this web version. So I can do things like live share, and I can have peer collaboration, real-time pair programming, that kind of stuff, all inside this remote container. So this is immensely efficient, gets me, boom, right into developing. And actually, I'm going to go back on what I said because I'm here and I want to save time. I'll do security last because I want to show you Copilot. Right? So what is Copilot? Copilot is something that sits alongside you. It's an AI that really is able to hone in on what you're trying to do, give you full code block suggestions, and do it in a secure way, right? Copilot for Business, our primary business offering for this, offers some really cool guarantees, high liability clauses inside the legal stuff. You can look at that later. I'm not a legal guy. But ultimately, the promise of this is that it's going to make you more efficient. And what we see is that this, in many cases, doubles your development speed. But it's also going to do it in a secure way, so that you never get this leakage problem where you write some code and you run it through an AI, and then the AI ends up getting retrained on your code, and then your code shows up in somebody else's suggestion somewhere, right? There have been some historic events where that's not so good. We make sure that doesn't happen by giving you your own ephemeral prediction environment and then deleting it right after. So your code that you pass in to the AI to give you suggestions doesn't go anywhere, doesn't get used for retraining, doesn't leak into other people's suggestions, all of that. So you've got speed of AI and you've got the security behind it, knowing that your code isn't being shared with other people, right? Mechanically, what does it do? What does this look like to a developer? Well, I'm sitting there and I got my code. You know, it's a silly little thing that shows a bunch of haikus and images, right? Okay. But ultimately I can see there's a bunch of, post endpoints in here. And each of these shows, a particular haiku, for example. So get haiku by ID does pretty much what you would expect. If you go to the web app and you say /22, it's going to show you haiku number 22, and it's going to show you the image and the haiku next to it, right? I won't bother spinning it up right now because I want to show you what Copilot does. I decided I want to do something different. Get a random haiku. Okay, you can see it's even predicting what I might want to do. I don't know if you saw that autocomplete right there, but it actually suggested haiku. Let's up the size on this a little bit. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. Usually it's giving me complete code blocks. In fact, yep, here we go. So it suggested an entire code block right here for how I might satisfy that problem. Some interesting things to pick out about this, right? First off, it's aware of the other functions I've already defined here. So it sees my pattern. It sees how I'm doing it, right? It sees, for example, that I'm generally using the index template to render this. So it assumes I probably want to use the index template again. It sees that the index template takes an array, not just a singular item, right? So even though getting a random haiku is going to return presumably one haiku, it embeds that inside an array for me to satisfy what it knows to be the pattern, right here, that the template is going to expect. By default, it's using math.floor, but I want to show you something else really cool about how it deals with context. Let's say I have a random library of some sort and I import it. Okay, so now we have a library imported called random, right? That's all it knows from the context. But I'll say that same thing again, get a random haiku. And when it makes the prediction this time, yes, it saw that I had a library called random. And so it made some assumptions. And it said, hey, you probably want to use that library instead of math.random. Otherwise, why would you have imported it? So it actually changes its suggestions contextually based on what you see. That's core Copilot. It's amazing. It will double your development speed. It did for me, at least. And the really cool thing about this is it takes out the mundane work, the stuff I don't want to do, which is just looking up, how does this particular framework work? Remembering a basic pattern and that sort of thing. It does that for me. I'm still responsible for the high level architecture and thinking. My job is not going away because as a developer, I need to shape how things are working together. And I need to write some of that custom code and vet what it creates. But it's taking the boring bits away. So I don't have to be searching the web and cutting and pasting. I just get the auto suggestions that it thinks will be relevant, and then I modify those to fit my needs. By the way, it's also making sure as it does that, none of this is cut and paste literal duplication of anything out there. These are all novel suggestions. We redact the training set from the suggestion set. So even if it comes up with an incidental exact match, generally speaking, it's not going to show it below a certain minimum. Like hello world is always hello world, right? But otherwise, it's giving you new stuff. So you don't have to worry about accidentally duping somebody else's code. Now, there is an evolution of this, which I won't have time to fully show you. But experimental, this is in beta right now, publicly, technically a feature preview, I think. So not the same set of legal guarantees and all that kind of stuff, but wonderful to play with. Look for Copilot Chat. It's also an extension for VS Code. With Copilot Chat, I get an interactive interface. So I can select a bunch of code, for example, and say, make this, in fact, I think we have a hotkey for it, secure. No. Okay, I can say something like make this more secure. It's going to analyze that code that I've selected, and it's going to say, okay, here is what you can do to protect against cross-site scripting, a bunch of other things, right? So I can understand some of the security problems that might be here. And it's giving me, in fact, a full rewrite of the application with the security options in place. I can say something like explain if I just don't know what this code does. Maybe it's in a language I don't read. Maybe it's somebody else's thing that I just want to know. It's going to give me a full description. I have taken these and cut and pasted them directly into documentation. They're often so good. I can even do things like say create a test suite. And because this is, half of our job as developers, testing what we create, right? And it's going to give me a basic, test harness. It's bringing in super test. It's going to create some suggested tests. Don't just accept these blind, go in and modify them. But it's at least getting me to the point where now I can just copy that, put it into my CI/CD as my core test suite, adjust it, and I'm off to the races, right? It's amazing. Everybody go play with it. Copilot is available for you all to play with. Copilot Chat is in public beta, so you can go pull this stuff now and start playing with it right away. Okay, and that brings us to the very last thing that we'll talk about. And here I'm not going to do so much live demo because we just don't have time. But security, right? Throughout all of this, you want to make sure that the code you're creating doesn't have security flaws as it goes out the door, right? So what are the security things and what's our mindset on how you do security, right? The most important thing I want you to take away from this is that the closer you get to the time of code development, the less security is going to be a problem for you. You don't want the experience of, I wrote a bunch of code. Maybe my CI/CD was fine with it. Okay. But then security review, which occurred at the end of the sprint cycle, kicks back and says, you got to go back and fix A, B, C, and D. Or worse yet, security check, whether it's automatic or human review, doesn't catch it. And you find out when there's actually a flaw in production and somebody intrudes on something, and then you have to pull back all your production releases, right? We want to attack the security aspect right at the point of development, which is why Dependabot is sitting there and it's analyzing as you submit code. Dependabot focuses on the safety of the modules that you bring in, the packages you bring in from other places, because that's where a lot of security vulnerabilities come from. And a lot of them are really simple. It's just, hey, this particular version of a package I brought in is not secure. It's known not to be secure because there's a CVE out on it. But you don't have time to go and manually analyze the security state of every single package you bring in, because if you're using NPM, you've probably got 2,000 plus packages, if you're lucky. Dependabot sits there, it analyzes every single change to your manifest files. Whatever language you're in, it's going to take a look at them and be like, okay, do I have CVEs on these? And then it's going to let me know right away. And it's going to give me not just a notification, but an automatic pull request saying, hey, this is what you need to change in order to make your application secure. So it's going to let me know if it knows what the compatibility level is. Often we can actually give you a percentage there, which is like, think of it as what's the chances that if I make this change, I'm going to have to go and refactor other code. And if it has a high compatibility score, which is one of the things we get from all the public data that we're allowed to see with our public repos, you can click the button and you can just accept the security change. Your application's secure from day 0 now. You're not going to get a security review later kicking it back. And you can move forward with your day. It's just that simple. And then the last thing I will say on security is we do have an advanced security package, which is an add-on, but this goes into the other things beyond just the dependencies you're using. It goes into, are there any security tokens anywhere in your code that need to be redacted? It'll actually block security tokens from getting off your physical box, which is great. And it also will analyze novel code. So advanced security can actually look at the code you just wrote and submitted, analyze it from an executional standpoint, tracing execution paths through, and say things like, does this have the potential for SQL injection? Does it have any code loops, any circular object dependencies, that sort of thing, and let you know right away so that you can, again, fix that within a day before it ever gets to the end of the sprint. All right, that's about all the things I've got time for, but I hope you've had a great time. I hope you've learned some things today. I'm going to stick around for a couple of minutes just in case there's any final questions. But otherwise, go forth, be awesome developers, enjoy the power, which is GitHub, and definitely circle back with us if you've got any questions. Thanks so much. I'm going to turn off my camera, hang out a little bit here, and I'll answer any questions on chat if they happen to come up. Have a good one.